This morning's webinar is about Webtop 4.8. This is something that a few of us have been watching and waiting for with bated breath, and I think Infor is about ready to pull the trigger and make it public. So we've invited Dave to come here this morning and um, tell us all about it. So if you could go to the next slide. Um, One of the things I want to remind everyone about is I want to put in a big plug for InPower in 2023. It's coming up in September. Um, this is a user group led conference. Infor obviously will be there, as will IBM and 40 plus solution vendors. There are 20 specific LX tracks. We're going to have a modernization track talking about tools like Webtop 4.8 and IDF and other things that you probably already own, and how you can drive your users to a modern browser-based experience using LX. There's also a finance track where we're going to do some deeper dives into the models, macros, and events and aliases that are used in common between CEA and EGLI, which is the new enhanced general ledger. We're also going to talk about costing and inventory and variance transactions. And then we are going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into EGLI, which is again, a modern browser-based GL. It's going to feel very similar, very familiar to LX people because it was based on CEA. Um, but again, it's been moved into the modern paradigm, and again, you probably already have a license for it. IBM will be there, and they'll have some IBM I tracks. New this year will be an IBM I security track, and we've got some impressive speakers, I think, coming to join us for that one. More on that probably next week. There's a webinar coming to talk about it, and some announcements there. There's also on Monday before the conference a hands-on enterprise integrator workshop, also another tool you probably already own. And they'll be talking about how you can use IDF to create your own applications and your own reports and your own dashboards. And so, and you'll actually be using a VPN to go back into your own system and do that. So, should be a very powerful workshop. And I strongly encourage LX people to attend. So, I really hope you can join us in Milwaukee in September. Reservations or registration is now open here on the InPower website. So just like you registered for this webinar, there's another event for InPower 2023, and we encourage you to come and join us. Dave, if you could move to the next slide.
Yep, and just for clarity, that is on September 11th is the first day of it, which is the Enterprise Integrator track, and then on the 12th, 13th, and 14th is where the product, actual ERP product tracks start. And yeah, and I really, I mean, I think this is, you know, Phil, the user community has put such an effort into putting this together. As you mentioned, this really is run by customers, and Infor is really just a sponsor along with many other sponsors like IBM. But you know, the things that we've seen come out of this, out of Empower over the last several years, is the networking and the things that people learn when they sit and collaborate over lunch, or you know, after a session with a cup of coffee or something like that, is really is remarkable. And I think sometimes the only way you can really open your horizons a little bit on the possibilities of how you're using LX and is really from talking to other customers. So I really encourage customers to attend that as well. So we hope to see you there.
Definitely. It's my pleasure to introduce Dave Rapaz, product manager for Infor LX, and let him talk about Webtop 4.8.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, so again, Webtop 4.8 is now generally available. We put it on our download center yesterday, so it is fresh off the presses, so to speak. So let me just talk a little bit about Webtop here, because as you know, we really put a lot of effort into modernization over the last several years. and it comes through different pieces of architecture. Infor Development Framework, or IDF as we refer to it, is really paramount to giving end users access to information in a much easier way. We've also rewritten applications with LX84 to use IDF for master data management, which brings a ton of value in terms of the ability to extend and write your own security rules around our master data. And we're going to continue to develop an IDF and deliver new capability in IDF. But a lot of times those are actually rewriting, right? We're actually taking the application and, in the cases of master data, we actually retired programs like ACP 100, INV 100, et cetera, where Webtop allows us to really transform our traditional applications like Word 700, PUR 500. It doesn't mean at some point we may rewrite those into IDF applications, but that's a long road to do those things, right? So the idea here is, hey, if we can transform those traditional applications through architecture, that should also be something we're focused on. And that is what we're able to do with Webtop 4.8, is really transform a lot of the traditional LX applications with not necessarily changing the application itself, but the architecture that presents it to you. And some of this has actually been around for a long time. So really, we need to start off with an introduction of what is Webtop. I don't know how many of you use it today. Many of you may have tried it years ago and backed off of it for a number of reasons, and we can talk about that in a minute. But I do want to kind of introduce everybody to Webtop. And with that, the idea of decorators, you hear the word decorators. Decorators are the personalization features that come as part of Webtop. Again, this doesn't change the underlying LX application. It is something that just changes the presentation when we present it in a web Chrome or Edge browser. So I want to spend some time on that because there's been a lot of decorator personalization features that have been available to you in Webtop 4.7 or even before that in some cases that many of you may not even be aware of, that we want to introduce you to as well. And then we'll get into Webtop 4.8, specifically what's happening in 4.8 that is really why we're making such a big deal about this release, because the decorators that are being added in 4.8 are, in my opinion, kind of groundbreaking. And then we'll open up for Q&A. So my presentation isn't going to show you everything. It's to get you to see that there's a lot of new capability. And we'll leave a lot of time for question and answer at the end of the presentation. And then, after that, if you have further questions, then we can, engage offline either through your account manager or through me directly. So, introduction to Webtop. This is where I really want to start because, again, Webtop's been around for a long time. And many of you may have tried it years ago and said, well, it's a screen scraper. It's just rendering the green screen in a web UI, and it's not as responsive as green screen, so why would I use it? And at that time, that was a fair point, to be honest with you, right? I mean, if I could go back in time, I would have never, released Webtop to the LX customers in its early state because it didn't add a lot of value, and therefore, some of you may think, what's the point of it? But over the last several years, we've made tremendous leaps forward with Webtop. So again, what is it? It is a way of generating the green screen application through a web UI. And you're going to hear us occasionally say a word called weblication. It's an Infor made-up word that we use, which is the process of actually taking the green screen and generating the web UI from it. And we do that through something called Webtop Studio, which is available to you as a customer. It's a separately licensed product, but it is available to you as a customer. If you've modified green screens or perhaps even written your own, there are some constraints about how you develop your applications and whether the Webtop Studio application will work with what you've developed internally. But it can be used to also generate web UI for a non-LX applications if you wanted to. And again, that process we refer to it as weblication. So with that, there's some basic things that always have been done with it, right? We generate a toolbar across the top that has certain things like copy the URL, quick launch, help, actions, as far as whether it's F3 to exit, F12 to cancel. Those things get generated through that process. There's drop-down menus, there's prompts that get generated. So just, see here that, there's a button you can press that generates a prompt window so you can see it. There are calendars, right? So, if there's a date field in the LX application, what we would do then is put a calendar prompt on it so you can have a graphical view and select the date from a calendar. If you so choose, you can also directly still key it in manually as you would have in the green screen. So that's another thing that Webtop just does as part of its architecture. And then also generates things like the messages, right? Giving you a message, so in the past, this would, pop up in a green screen. Now you'll see it pop up in a window in Webtop. So this is really what it's been around for years to do for you. And like you say right here, so far what we've shown you in these few screenshots is really still just generally a screen scraper for the most part, right, with the added features of calendars and things like that. But we've really kind of evolved a lot from there, right? So let me go back to Webtop 4.7 because this is really where we started evolving in terms of what can we do with this application that we can't do in a green screen. And a number of things have happened to make that happen. First off, we've improved performance dramatically, right? We re-architected Webtop so the workload sits more at the desktop versus communicating all of that through the web server, through the network to the end user. So there's a lot of information that gets cached. So that performance has been dramatically improved. So why would you not want to use this if performance is improved and you don't have the lag that you had previously? Now we got to talk about adding value, and this is really where the value starts to be demonstrated. So there's certain things that we've done in terms of what we call contextual capability, the ability to have multiple windows. And so let me just introduce you to a little bit of that. You've probably all seen this before, but I have to do this just in case somebody hasn't, and remind all of you of this. But some of the features you see here are going to require SIW, which is System I Workspace, and InfoOS, which is our platform to provide things like workflows, alerts, notifications, and among other things, document management, etc. So what you're going to see here is enabled through Webtop, but still requires those additional solutions. So one of the things that we can do is start from an IDF list, right? So if we think about ORD 700 D1 in its basic format, as you know it, right? It's a green screen that shows you a list of orders, and you make a decision to revise, create, delete from that order entry list that has always existed in ORD 700. Frankly, we're not going to obsolete ORD 700 D1, but it is really, under this model, is really rather obsolete in its usage, because if you see that same list inside of IDF, you can maintain that list any way that you want. You can build your own views, your own sorts, your own subsets, change the columns, reorganize things. So here we're looking at, in IDF, a list of customer orders. And in this list of customer orders, we have the same options we had in ORD 700 D1, which is create, change, delete, copy. And when we execute one of those options by either clicking up on the top with one of the icons at the top, or right-clicking on it and taking one of the options in the menu options you see there, it will open up in Webtop the ORD 700 application, bypassing that initial screen where you would select the order. So this allows us to go directly from the IDF inquiries to Webtop. And here's where you're seeing some of the more advanced capabilities of Webtop. We'll get into that in a minute. But also, when I make a change in here, right, if I add a line or change the request date, change a quantity, whatever it is, as soon as I accept the order, it takes me back to the IDF list where I can now go back and work with other inquiries. So it's a very streamlined navigation from IDF to Webtop. And the closing here of this was an enhancement we did to Webtop several years ago, so that we gracefully exit the order maintenance program and come back to the inquiry program. So other things we can do in Webtop that we added before 4.8 was what we call contextual support. So these widgets you see on the right come through InfoOS. and they're user defined, right? So what I have here may not work for all of your situations. It's not for me to say these are the things I would put in here, but this is just to give you an idea of the art of the possible, so to speak, right? So when we are in Org 700 and maintaining an order, Webtop is publishing through JSON message certain elements about that order. It's publishing the customer or a PO number. Which you may have gotten from. Actually, correct. I'm sorry. Here I went to a different program. I'm on purchase order maintenance. Forgive me. I misspoke. I'm on purchase order maintenance, and what it's doing here is it's publishing the PO number, and therefore I can get PO details on the right, showing me the status of each line. Is it received? Is it costed? So I'm getting graphs there about each line and its status in terms of being costed or received. I have information about the vendor in the lower widget, and it's showing me all of the invoices that are open for this vendor. And then also the item number is being published to show me the inventory levels of that particular item that I'm working on. And so that middle widget there that's showing information about the item would change as I select different lines in the order. So if I go down to line 3 and select a different item, it's going to show me the inventory for that item. But it doesn't have to be inventory. It could be item specifications. It could be costing information. It could be whatever it is that I need to do as a user to be more efficient in my purchase order maintenance or creation process. So this is something that is why we feel Webtop is going to gain efficiency over green screen, right? You have these widgets that are giving you information in real time. You don't have to go to another screen, write something on a post-it, do an inquiry on inventory, or do an inquiry on item weights or specifications. I could even have a drawing of the item here or an image of the item. So it's rather unlimited in terms of what you have in these widgets, and really can transform the way people use the application and gain efficiency in doing so. So other things we can do is having multiple windows, right? So for those of you that use green screen, often you may have been in a situation where you have multiple green screen tabs open. Obviously within this, it's browser based, so we can have a lot of different tabs, but you can also have windows side by side. So through SIW, when I have my menu option, SIW is System My Workspace, which is really where we manage the menus at an individual user level, where everybody has their favorites, perhaps. If you want to open something and look at it side by side next to another application, you can very easily do that as well by just saying open it up in a pop-out window. And now I'm seeing the Webtop screen side by side with perhaps an IDS screen or another Webtop screen, whatever that may be. And if I have two monitors, then of course I can take this and drag it into another screen and look at those side by side in a full screen. So those are the reasons why we feel Webtop is really still critical to our modernization efforts and how we can transform programs like PUR 500, programs like Org 700 without holistically rewriting those applications. Again, doesn't mean we won't rewrite them in an IDF someday, but for now, this really does provide tremendous value over the green screen without, adding, if we were to rewrite those programs, that would happen in, let's say, an 8.4.3 or an 8.4.4 or an 8.5 release that we would do that in, which means you can't benefit from it now, where today, if you're on 8.3.5 or 8.4, you can get these advanced features without having the cost of upgrading the ERP system. So additional capabilities that come through Webtop come through what we call decorators. So I'm just going to go through what a decorator is here for a minute, so you have some understanding in terms of what that is. So really what a Webtop decorator is it is like, you already saw some of those, right? You saw where we put a calendar. We did that at Infor by putting a calendar decorator on a date field, so that when you click on it, you see it as calendar and can select those dates. So there are decorators that we've put into the system already to improve the user experience. but there is the opportunity now for you as an administrator of the system, and even an end user. The end user side of it, I will be honest, is a little bit technical, so it's probably going to be done more at an administrative level. And I mean, that's one of those areas we need to look at to see how we make it easier for end users to do their own decorating if need be. But for now, like I said, the opportunity is to do it at both levels, individual or at an administrative level. But most of what we're going to show you today really would be intended for administrative type things. And and then again, when you do go through this, it simply adds. It's not changing the green screen code. It's simply just the way it's presenting it to you. So here are the list of decorators that have existed in Webtop 4.7 and 4 that you may not have been aware of, never tried, never adopted, that may add value to what you're doing. I'm not going to go through all of these. These are all documented in our administration guide, but these are today the decorators that are included. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will show you some of them in detail. Some of them that I won't show you any detail, like email decorator, right? So let's say you have, a vendor email address on the vendor map. Well, if you're on 835, obviously in 8.4, that's an IDF, so it's a little bit different. But even on a PO, let's say if you had an email address, you can add an email decorator on that. And when you click on that, it will launch your, probably Outlook for most of you, but if it's not, whatever your email service is, it will launch Outlook and populate the email with that email address that's on the PO or whatever else it is. Again, streamlining that process of sometimes what you may need to do while you're in a PO is to maybe email the vendor. So that's just an example of one of the decorators. I'm not going to go into it in depth here today, but that is one that's available to you. So let me just show you a couple of them just so you have an idea of what they look like and how they behave. So this one here is what we're going to show you what we call radio buttons. So if you're familiar with ACR 500, there is a mode button which determines whether or not, as I progress to the next screen, whether I'm going to be processing a payment or creating an invoice, a debit memo, credit memo, or fast paying. So in the past, you would have to go in there and put one of those values in, and you may not, even the CRT and DBT and FP are rather cryptic. So what we could do is change that to a radio button, and now you have a nice way of just clicking on whatever it is that you want to do when you progress to the next screen. With this, you have two options. One of them is to do it in what we call a stacked view, right? So depending on the screen and the way that it's presented, maybe you don't want this stretched out. If there's 5 or 6 options, you'd rather have it put into a stacked view. So when you design these, you have the choice of doing radio buttons stacked or spread out horizontally. So that is what we call radio buttons. Let me show you another way to do this, which there's no right or wrong. And the other way to do it would be what we would call a list box, right? So instead of having the radio buttons, I've gone and put a list box decorator on here instead. And you'll see there's a little a prompt or a button there to click on, which when I do that will drop down and give me the choices that I have, just like you saw on the radio buttons. Now, things to consider with this, right? What's the right, wrong thing to do? I think personally, in my opinion, the radio buttons are more aesthetic. I like the way that they look. But think about, your users, your 27-year-old user, that is more, expecting a more modern user experience. But think about your traditional user that's been around the application for 20 years and how they would use this. The advantage of a drop-down is that I can still just use my mouse to tab, 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 and put a 1 in the mode field if I want to do an invoice, or a 0 in the payment if I want to do a payment. So the end user is less affected. The traditional end user, I should say, is less affected by a dropdown because it allows them to not have to use their mouse to put in the payment type, versus the other one where they would have to tab into it and select it. So just consideration there. Also consider, what we're trying to make sure people understand is the potential behind some of this. So imagine you don't want people to ever do credit memos in ACR 500. Credit memos should only come through an order. You should, whether you're reducing the quantity or you're changing the price, you want to do that on the order and then affect the invoice through Ord 700 and not just doing a direct credit memo. So if credit memos are something you don't want people to do in ACR 500, you don't have to modify the LX application anymore to do that. The source code, right? You can actually do that through this process of how you generate your decorator. So one of the things you can do is in the dropdown, you can say, when you build the decorator, the options are, what options do you want to provide? And do you want to limit the choices to what's in the dropdown? So you'll see in the next screen here, I have taken away, when I built the decorator, I have taken away the credit memo option. So through this, now no user would be able to process a credit memo through ACR 500 anymore without us making any modification of source code. Now, as I mentioned earlier, decorators can be global or they can be at a user level. So there is a way to go and still give a set of users or individual users the ability to have a credit memo still. So that would be, as an administrator, you would have to work with the end user to put that back to them as an option. But again, something to consider is this is just a really nice way to potentially limit what people do. And it may not just be here, right? Think about all the possibilities. Limiting the currencies that somebody uses, or you just in this own screen, limiting the company number that they use. Even though we have a prompt on company, you can put your own decorator instead and convert it to a list box and only have the companies that you want people to use, the currencies that you want people to use, or even for that matter, the bank, right? Or even the customer number. Maybe you should only be processing payments for certain customers. So there's a lot of possibilities here that I think when we start thinking about the art of the possible, those are always things to consider. And it's not just ACR 500, right? You can transform that, or think about that being the same concept being applied in other applications. So the next one here is really just buttons, right? So for those people, again, that aren't familiar with F6 and F3 and F12 and whatever else it is, you have the ability to add a button on the screen that will give the user a way of seeing, a way of executing the accept, for instance, without having to know it's F6. So again, as we think about newer users versus older users, that could be beneficial. And of course, older users, this has no negative consequence to, because it's just a button on the top that they can choose to use, or still press F6 if they so chose. So I'm just going to quickly here, just a couple screens that show you how the decorator function works, right? So here you'll see the hamburger menu option across the top. This needs to be turned on at a user level to give the person the authority to do this. Along with that authority, they're then determine whether they have the ability to do it only for themselves or the ability to do it for themselves and everyone. So in this case, I'm saying all users, and it will open up a window that will allow me to say, well, what do you want to, what kind of decorator do you want to add? And you'll see in here, I'm going to create, I've chosen, I want to create a button action decorator, and that I'm going to call it exit. Is what it's going to do as far as the description. Where is that going to be placed on the screen, and what action is it going to do? So 03 is F3, 06 is F6, 12 is F12, etc. So upon doing that, now you'll see I have an exit button on the screen that wasn't there previously, and now that people want, if they want to exit out of the screen, they can press F3 or exit and not have to know the function keys if they don't.
Dave, we've actually got a couple questions on that.
Yeah, so can we send to the end? Is that
sure.
right? Okay. And then just a couple other decorators, the hide decorator, right? So you'll see here in PUR 500, there's an EDI field. Maybe we don't use it. People are also asking questions about it. What am I supposed to do with it? Well, let's just take it off the screen to eliminate that question and confusion, or even people doing something maybe that they're not supposed to. So there's a hide decorator that I can use to remove things from the screen. There is a yes, no checkbox, right? So same thing here. There's a, do I have a 0 or 1? What does that mean? I'd rather just have a box to say, yes, this is a preliminary PO, check it, and it will be processed that way. Other things you can do as a required decorator, right? So you'll see a little red dot on the field that indicates that this field must be used in processing. Now in 4.7, there is no validation of the fact of whether somebody actually did put something in the comment field. In 4.8, though, you do have the ability to validate whether somebody did put something in a required field. So some differences there between 4.7 and 4.8 in terms of the required decorator. So I'm going to go on to Webtop 4.8 here next, but if Phil, if a few of those questions are very specific to what I just did, maybe we can knock those out real quick.
Sure. So the first question is, how would you migrate those customizations across environments like dev, test, and prod?
Yeah, there is going to be documentation on how to do that.
Okay.
So I'm not going to explain that here in this session, but we understand the importance of being able to do that. And there is some documentation that is available to talk about how that's done.
Okay. And the second question was, if a user enters a 3 in that drop-down box you created where you took the credit memo off, would that be allowed, or would that be an error?
That you could do it either way. So you could, hide it so it doesn't look like it's available, but people could still do that. So in the decorator for radio buttons, maybe not for radio buttons, for the drop downs, so for that one for sure, there is an option that says allow options that aren't in the list. Now you're still going to always validate the green screen, right? So in that case, you couldn't put a 7 in because green screen is going to still say there's no such thing as a 7, right, in that screen, and we won't, programmatically that fails. But you could still do a 3 and not have it in the list if you wanted to, but I question the reason to do that. So there is a choice of saying only allow options that are in the drop down, which would then eliminate the possibility of somebody using a 3.
Great. That's it. Thank you.
That's it? Okay. So let's go on to Webtop 4.8. So it's now available, as I mentioned early on, right? And it's available for 8.3.5 and 8.4. So again, this is our commitment. Like, how do we, time to value? How do we give our customers more value without a lot of disruption in terms of the core ERP? Because everything we're doing here isn't changing ERP logic. It isn't changing the code. So like many of the things, our last IDF release, right, available for 8.3.5 and 8.4, Webtop available for 8.3.5 or 8.4. So our customers, if you're on 8.3.2 and you may not be ready to do a full upgrade to 8.4 because the database changes, 8.3.5 may be a very logical thing for you to do because you're just doing almost like a large Beamer explosion onto your environment with no database changes, so you're not going to impact integrations. And then you have access to these applications without the disruption of a full ERP upgrade. And more of our customers are either on 8.3.5 or 8.4, right? So this is why we're doing what we're doing, is we want to add value with least amount of disruption possible. And architecture improvements like this are a dramatic way for us to be able to do that. So this release, the big thing we did here is adding what we call a grid decorator. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on that. There are other decorators that we've delivered with this as well. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those. And then there's some copy and paste features. Now that's something that, if you want to paste into let's say a note field that, had 12 lines on it or something like that, and you want to paste it, you can now paste into notes. You can also paste into other areas, but there are some considerations in doing that because it is a subfile perhaps that you're pasting into, and that subfile needs to be open with remaining space to actually paste it. And those are things we'll get into probably at Empower, right? We're going to spend at Empower a lot about Webtop and educating people on it and giving more in-depth information than we're able to do here in this webinar. and really an opportunity for people to get their hands on it in our demo center. So the new decorators, I mentioned grid, right? So this is what we're most excited about because it allows us to get away from the traditional green screen of 27 by 32 or what was before 24 by 80 and present things in a grid where it allows you to give things like you can reorganize columns, remove columns, do filtering, sorting, like you would in most grid-based applications, like you would in IDF or in Excel. There's an autofill function. So this is, really a kind of a cool thing, right? Let's say, a lot of applications, maybe you only have one company, or maybe you only have one currency in your enterprise. If that's the case, you may want to use autofill to automatically fill some of those values on any screen, so that you eliminate possible, errors or keystrokes or just efficiency, right? So very self-explanatory, but again, you can go into a field and say, always default the company number to 10 because that is the only company that is being used, or at least used by maybe some individuals, and limit the keystrokes there. Masking is a way of saying, well, we don't want to show the full, again, in LX, we don't have a lot of confidential data, but if there is things that you don't want people to see, you have the ability to mask the information so that it's either just kind of hidden from the user. So you can do part of it. Let's say it is as an example would be a social security number, which we don't have in LX, or a credit card number, but you could show the last 4 digits and the rest of it would be blacked out where you wouldn't see it. So that's what masking is capable of doing. List box, this just goes back to what we just talked about. List boxes have been there all along. Like I showed you with the ACR 500 process type, whether it's a payment, invoice, credit memo, and going back to what Phil asked, is there ability to limit the choice? There is in 4.8. So 4.8 is where we introduce that ability to say, you cannot enter a 3 if it's not in the drop-down box. So that's an enhancement to an existing decorator. And then the required decorator, which I mentioned before you could highlight something and say, hey, this is a required field, you need to put data into it. But now there's actually a way to ensure that people are actually putting data into required fields. There are some things to be aware of, right? So again, grids do not change the actual subfile. That's a key thing to know, right? Where you're not changing the underlying application. It's really just the way that it's being presented to the user. So if we think about a subfile that maybe showed you 8 records or 12 records, or what we're able to do with that is just automatically load more records. So instead of the user pressing page down to get another 8, page down to get another 8, page down to get another 8, we can automatically load those as part of the grid definition. Now there's considerations there, right? You can say, first off, is this going to create, I don't want to do this in, let's say, somewhere where I'm loading 10,000 records, right? To load all of those records. So there's considerations that you need to think about as you do this in terms of performance impact when you're administrating and building these grids out. And so we've got a document out there that talks about considerations and caveats. There are some programs that don't allow automatically load additional screens. PUR 500 is one example of that. You can't build a grid to show me 500 lines at once. It doesn't allow it. Now in 842, we're looking at that. How do we make as an enhancement to the ERP? We want to change the way subfiles are built in the actual application for PUR 500 and deliver that as an enhancement that will then enable this type of capability to better work in Webtop. So there are some exclusions and things like that. So again, we've got a KB article that goes out and talks about considerations and caveats in building your grid. And you can still build grids in PUI 500 to get what I mentioned earlier, right? The column reorganizing or column deleting, things like that. You're still going to be able to do there. It's just not going to be able to load, 200 PO lines at once at this point. And it is something we hope to deliver with 842. And that'll be a key thing for us, right? Now that we have IDF and Webtop 4.8 architecture, we want to look at our applications and say, what do we need to do in the application now that we have this capability to better improve it? And I've talked to the board even about PUR 500 specifically, because in the past, we often developed for green screen, and we wanted to show as many rows in green screen as we could. And a lot of times what they meant was, well, we've got to now go and drill into each line to change a date, or drill into each line to change the warehouse. Well, wouldn't it be better to have the warehouse and the date in that subfile list so that users don't have to go and open up every line in the subfile to do what it is that they want to do? And with now that gives us that luxury of saying, well, we can add those fields back to the application without negatively affecting the number of rows that can be built, because of the grid capability allows us to do that anyway. It's getting rather technical, I know, but that is going to give us a way for 842 and 843 to leverage the ability of Webtop to improve and gain efficiency in the traditional applications by reducing the number of keystrokes people have to take to drill into each line. So those are things that we're going to, like I say, be committed to. We'll talk a lot about that at Empower to hear your ideas on that. But we're excited about it because it is going to change the way that we approach some of our applications. So here is the grid in ORD 700. So I probably should have showed you a green screen of this, but I think many of you know this screen as it is today, right? Where if we open up ORD 700, we only see a certain number of rows at a time. The description is in the fold column, so you'd have to unfold the screen to see the description. Now here you're going to see the description is right next to the item number, because that is the way that I decorated the grid when I built it. So these are all things that now you can do with Webtop 4.8 and 8.3.4 and 8.3.5 to now present ORD 700 as a grid. So what you'll notice here is I'm going to go through and zoom out. I'm going to change the resolution of my screen, and you'll see as I do that, I'm getting more and more rows. It's showing me as many rows as it can based on my screen resolution. So if you have a 50-inch monitor, you can imagine you're going to see a lot of rows. But you also notice there's a scroll bar on the right that allows me to drag that up and down to easily scroll through the list of items on that order. So it does resize. We are no longer limited to the 24 by 80 screen resolution or 27 by 30 screen resolution for the subfile portion of the application. So let me go back to the normal sizing of it here. And quickly, let me just show you. We go back one size here. As I did this, you'll notice that there's a scroll bar on the bottom. And as I scroll out, there's less to scroll on the bottom. And eventually, there's no scroll bar on the bottom because all columns are now being displayed. So let me just go back to regular screen resolution. One of the things we had to do with this, because now that we're using so much real estate down the bottom, is where do we put our error messages? The error messages are still on the bottom as well. If you scrolled that bar all the way down on the right, you'd be able to see those as well. But we put a warning message or a error message icon on the top left. If you see that red dot that tells you have an error, you can click on it. And now you see the error messages on the top too. So based on your screen resolution, we felt that they should no longer be on the bottom of the screen. One of the other things we did was sort capability, right? So I'm going to go through these quickly because I said we're going to leave time for Q&A. But let's say I want to sort on price, right? You'll see two little chevrons there, hard to see in the screen print, with a descending, ascending option. So if I want to go descending, I can click on the upside down triangle, and now I am looking at that order that is in descending order based on price. I can filter in the column. So again, if I have a very large order and I'm looking for certain types of items, maybe on the item description, you'll see my options here at contains or is empty or whatever those are, equals to, ends with, where I can put in a value. Again, the filters here will vary based on the type of column it is. So if it was in a quantity field or amount field, I could do greater than, less than. So I would have different options in terms of filters based on the type of data that's being presented. But this is an alphanumeric field, so it's going to give me an option like contains. I type the word in there that I want to limit it to, and now you'll see that I'm seeing only the order lines that have an item with the word role in it. Just another function of the filter capability. You'll see I have an option over here to clear the filters. So I can click on those three dots and say clear the filters. There's other things I can do in here as well. We're not going to get into all of those. And now I'm back to my regular full list because I've cleared the filter. I could also just back out in the description field. If I backed out the word role, it would automatically refresh. In fact, it does it dynamically, right? So, if I type in the word R, it's going to show me any item, anything that has an item description with the letter R in it, which is probably going to be very common. As I type O, it starts looking for RO. As I type ROL, it starts looking for ROL. So it is dynamic as you go through it and filtering that list. You can also move columns around. So you can do this when you build the grid as an administrator, but then the end users have the ability to simply move columns around, as you're seeing here, where I'm going to put the unit of measure after warehouse, because that's where I prefer to have it. And you'll see that's done. Now that is being cached at a user level, right? So that user would not see that if they went to another device. But that is something that they can do at a user level without actually turning on the decorator. If you wanted you to measure permanently over on the right after warehouse, you should build a decorator. When you build your decorator, put that column there as opposed to where it was originally. So this gives you kind of just a dynamic way of doing that. You can also resize columns, right? Because some of you may not use very long item numbers. Others you may use the full 35. So if you did, that gives you the ability to kind of resize the columns. And then lastly, you can export this as well, right? So any subfile that we're presenting in the screen can be exported to Excel. When I do this, it's going to say, or you can export it to Word. You'll just see here where I'm exporting it to Excel. And now I have an Excel spreadsheet with all the order lines that I had seen on the screen. So that is a high-level overview of 4.8. And more information can be found here. So we've still got a couple documents on Webtop that we are publishing later today. They should be out there very shortly. The release notes and the administrator guide, right? So the release notes specifically talk about what's new with 4.8. The administration guide talks about how do I build decorators, manage the decorators, among other things in that as well. Those will be available at Infor Document Central with the link that I have here. We will post this PowerPoint so people have access to the URLs that are underneath this for their use. And then also, that I mentioned earlier, the considerations for LX with Webtop 4.8. Again, Webtop is not unique to the LX applications. It's used by other IBMI applications as well. Every IBMI application has its own nuances. So we do have a KB article that is specific to LX considerations when using new Webtop 4.8 features. Now, one thing I do want to remind people of is that fundamentally, installing 4.8 doesn't change anything, right? These are things that you need to go on and turn on. And there are some minor things we did with Webtop 4.8 in terms of, just adoption of Infor standards and things like that. You'll notice some minor changes maybe in the presentation layer. But really, holistically, the application is unchanged. So, we want you to know that upgrading to 4.8 doesn't necessarily have an impact unless you want it to. And that's where then you go out and, as an administrator, start adding these decorators where you wish. So with that, again, we encourage people to come to Empower on September 11th, learn more about this. If you want to learn more about it between now and then, reach out to myself or your account manager, and we can give you a little bit more detail when you're ready. But for now, let's take the next 10 minutes. And Phil, I'm guessing there may be some other questions. And Phil, maybe you're muted.
And so I am. First question from Rhonda. Is Weblication required to add decorators?
Well, when you install the LX application, everything is Weblicated. You do not need to re-Weblicate things. The only time you would ever re-Weblicate things for Webtop Studio is if you truly modified the source code to the application that we delivered. So if you've made a source code modification and you need that modification to be seen in the web, and again, source code modification, if it's a processing thing, it won't matter. But if it's a source code modification to the presentation layer of the application, you would need to weblicate that, just see it, aside from decorators, just to see your modification. So probably not the most direct answer here, sorry. But weblication is not needed for decoration purposes.
The next question, will the decorator-related customizations be preserved as Infor makes changes to underlying screen layouts via beamers or new versions?
Yes, and that is something we're taking great caution to. There is metadata underneath all of this that is storing those presentation layers, and we encourage you to take backups of it just in case. And we can talk more about how you go about doing that. But yeah, the intent is we are not polishing in most cases. We're allowing you to do that for that reason. You own those things, and therefore, just because we've changed something, you may need to repolish it because maybe it's something where we've added a column, right? If I go back to that PUR 500 example, right, where maybe we put a date field into the subfile that didn't used to be there before, you'll need to retool that if you but it wouldn't be a major amount of work. But otherwise, an upgrade to the ERP should not impact your decorators.
Next question, is an extra license required to have the new functions?
No, Webtop is available to all LX customers on maintenance. 4.8 is our most current release, so we want all customers on 4.7 or 4.8, and at some point, 4.8 will be really what we want all customers on, and there is no additional license to get 4.8, and there's no additional cost to use the decorators.
Next question is, what format are the spreadsheet and Word exports from Webtop? Are they open document formats like NetLink? Like NetLink.
I don't know the answer to that, and we can get that for you. I don't know the answer, unfortunately. We'll make a note to get that answered.
Next question. In the list box, can we define the list by user security to allow a user by user basis who can see certain values in the list?
Yeah, so this is an area, like I said, that we probably need to think about how we can make improvements to the product, right? Because today, it is, if you have the ability to decorate, you have then the ability to do it. You decide whether you have the ability to do it for all users or yourself. If you wanted to use this as a security way to control that type of processing, what I would probably recommend is contacting your services organization, because there is a way to potentially push out decorators to individual users, right? So if we saw, when I'm building a decorator today, I am building it for everyone, or I'm only building it for myself. If you don't want end users to really have that authority to do it themselves, because if they did, then you would have a situation where they could turn that on and off and change the decorator, right? So I'm getting wrapped around the axle here a little bit. But through our services organization, I think we would have a way to say, me as an administrator, I don't want to give end users decorator capability, but I think there is a way that we can manage that to push those out to individuals. So one user has one set of options in ACR 500, and another user could have another set of options in ACR 500. Do we need to make that easier in the future? I think we do, and it's something we'll look at. But until then, I think there is a way to do it through our services organization.
And our next question is Webtop Studio required for changing decorators?
No, it is not. Again, Webtop Studio would only be necessary if you changed your display source code. or if you've built your own applications and you want to bring them into a web UI as well, right? So not needed at all for decorator purposes.
And then the last question I had, oops, it was the last question. Next question is, are there any enhancements to Webtop Studio to allow migration of metadata across environments?
I don't think that's a Webtop Studio function. Again, I'm not a technical expert on this. I think, at some point, Webtop Studio is, something that enables Webtop, right? So, I mean, there's always going to be a view of what can we do to improve Webtop Studio. I don't think that's the metadata. I don't think is a function of Webtop, but I'm not sure on that. So we'll need to go back and circle back on that question.
Okay. Next question is, can you turn on decorator capability for a user, make decorations while logged in as that user, then turn decorator capabilities off for the user and the decorations are retained?
Yes. So the authority to decorate, to be somebody that can create a decorator, is not tied to the presentation that may be available after the decorator capability is removed, right? So think about it. Basically, you're writing if you turn on decorator, you're writing metadata to say how something is going to be presented to all users or yourself. If you take that decorator capability away, that metadata is still there, and it's still going to change the presentation. I don't want to, as far as signing on as somebody else, typically we don't want to support that, right? You should be, for security purposes, you should never be signing on as somebody else. However, you could go sit with a coworker and turn on decorator capability for somebody in finance. Go sit with that person at their desktop while they're logged in and do the polishing that you want for them. And then go back to you as administrator, turn off that ability for them, and now that would be locked in, right? They wouldn't have the ability to change anymore. So that would be kind of a workaround to do that internally if you wanted to, if that makes any sense.
Yep. And the next question is, in PUR 500, you demonstrated the widgets on a line basis. Is this available in PUR 300?
Well, I would first question whether or not PUR 300, why PUR 300 is being used. As you know, I'm pretty strong about the fact that we put a lot of investment into our building alternatives to our 300 level applications. It's not true in all cases, but programs like INV 300, or 300, PUR 300, there is a better view of that data available to you in IDF. And of course, all IDF applications have those widget capabilities. So the use of PUR 300, I would question the need for it. Whether we call that contextual capability. It could be there in PUR 300. I don't know off the top of my head. If it's not there, I doubt that we would enhance it to put it there, because I'm of the opinion you should be using, purchase order inquiry in IDF. And if there's some reason you're not using it, we need to understand why. Is there a gap that's preventing you from getting away from PUR 300 to using the IDF inquiry? Because that is strategically what we're trying to get people to do. So whoever asked that question, please reach out to me. We can have a conversation about that, because I'd like to understand what it is you're looking to accomplish.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions? That's all I see in the list at the moment. And we are at time. So.
Well, thank you, Phil, and the user board for giving me a platform here to share what we're doing with Webtop. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all our customers that joined. I know this is a lot of information, and we're here to support you on it, right? So we'll look for other things coming. I think we'll be putting some examples onto our community page shortly about how to do some of these things. Again, not fully going to show you every possibility, but at least give you some ways to make sure you understand how this can be done, and give you a little bit of pointers so that you can start playing with this.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I want to mention that this session was recorded, and we will be putting the recording up on our community page as soon as it's available. And so that's, I think, a wrap for today. Thanks, everyone.